did not know. She also holds an MA in International Relations from the Humboldt University of Berlin, the Free University of Berlin, and the University of Potsdam. She earned her BA in International Relations and German Studies from Mount Holyoke College, and perhaps the most important entry, which is not listed here, is that she is the current graduate research assistant for the Center for European Studies, which is, of course, her greatest accomplishment. And I believe I can publicly announce a FLAS recipient for the academic year. So, with no further ado, I would invite Christine to begin.
Right, yes. Thank you very much for coming and for your interest in my presentation. I don't need to introduce myself any further, given that wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. So my talk today is just going to be discussing the kind of initial stages of a research project I'm involved with for my dissertation in anthropology here at UF. The title of today's talk is Viable, Equitable, and Ecological: Tourism as Sustainable Development in the North Caucasus. And it's more of a question about what sorts of practices of tourism are going on right now in the North Caucasus with regards to tourism, and I'll get into that a little bit further about why tourism, why right now, and why that's interesting. But first I'm going to start off with a brief, because I'm not sure how many of you, are familiar with the geography of the North Caucasus and that region. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to my current status of research, and then go into tourism in the North Caucasus, go into sustainable development and tourism, and then look at my research locations and tourism developments. So the introduction will include a little geographical tidbit here about the location. As you see on the map, these are two different geographical maps. First of all, you can see the North Caucasus is this region right here. In comparison, if you're looking at, Turkey, Romania, to kind of give you a little bit of an orientation. And here, you can actually see one of the spots where my research is located, which is in Donbai, which is right across the border to this breakaway territory of Abkhazia, which is politically disputed by Russia. And Georgia and many other countries. So here you have another kind of basic map outlining a little bit more the different republics of the North Caucasus, starting from Dagestan in the east all the way up to Karachay-Cherkessia in the west. And this republic right here, Karachay-Cherkessia, is where my research is located. And again, you can see that it's mainly bordering Abkhazia over there, which in this map is kind of showing the disputed borders and territories. Here, just a little bit of a background, and this is a different perspective. This is Karachay-Cherkessia right there. It is part of the North Caucasus Federal District, which was split from the Southern Federal District on January 19th, 2010, due to ethnic Russian pressure, Russians not wanting to be part of the Northern Caucasus territories, given that there's a high number of minorities living in that region. The entire size is 65,800 square miles, and ethnic Russians comprise 30.26% of the total population, at least according to the 2010 census. And the total population in the North Caucasus Federal District is almost 9.5 million. And you can see here, this is Karachay-Cherkessia, its area. This is kilometers squared. In the 2010 census, it had 477,859 people living there. And so here again, geographically, you can see, and this is why it's interesting for me with tourism, is you look at the Greater Caucasus Mountains, right? And you have here this mountain range, which has historically, in the past, and presently also been a tourist attraction, mainly for Russians, also throughout the Soviet Union. It was inspiration for writers, for literature. You have Lermontov and Pushkin and a lot of other Russian writers who were really inspired by going on vacations in this region. And so you have here again this mountain range stretching all the way up from Sochi and then down to, almost entirely down to Baku in Azerbaijan. So again, this is just another kind of closer look again at where I'm located right there. Just wanted to make sure we had the geography straight. So why tourism? Historical aspects. This is actually a location not in Karachay-Cherkessia, but up in this region of Stavropol, a little bit south, is called Kislovodsk, and it is a very famous and well-known, at least amongst Russians, tourist location. And you have a lot of development from the turn of the century, right, from the late 1800s, and you had a lot of, it was a very famous place for Soviet officers and Soviet political people to come down here and actually, vacation there. So there is a historical aspect. You also see that evident in literature as well. So why tourism? More contemporary aspects. So this is more of a recent push. This got me interested originally in looking more closely at tourism in the North Caucasus. You had in 2010 the release by the Kremlin, the federal government, a strategy for the socio-economic development of the North Caucasus Federal District until the year 2025. So there were 11 sub-programs. I won't go into all of them here, but one of them, which is very interesting, is the development of a tourist cluster in the North Caucasus Federal District, and including other territories nearby. So this whole idea of tourism kind of came out actually of the Sochi Olympics. So planning for that and looking at the beautiful natural resources there actually led to further discussion about how to instill development in the North Caucasus, because it has in the past been such a problem with regards to what to do to stop demographic decline. People are leaving, children from mountain villages are leaving to go into the cities to become doctors and lawyers, and they're not staying in their villages. And people in the North Caucasus are very heavily reliant on subsidies as well. So you can see there are some other aspects here of resorts and tourism, but this was kind of the original push for this. So the Russian federal government created the joint stock company, Northern Caucasus Resorts, on October 14th, 2010. And so this is the main company that is managing all of these 7 resorts in this tourist cluster throughout the North Caucasus. So in every republic, there is one of these resorts that's either been already built or is in the process of being built. And some of them include updates to previous tourist sites. So here, these are all of the locations actually for the resorts of the North Caucasus. So you have Arkhis up here, and this is in Karachay-Cherkessia, and this is one of the sites that is included in my research. And then you have going down in Kabardino-Balkaria, you have Elbrus, and then basically going on down through every Caucasian republic until you get to Dagestan, where they are forming the Caspian Coastal Cluster, which is a series of a cluster of a few resorts, I believe about 6 resorts that are supposed to be ski resorts, alpine resorts. Again, most of these resorts have to do with all year-round tourism. So in the winter you have skiing, in the summer you have hiking, mountain biking, and so this is really supposed to stimulate year-round tourism. And mainly the goal for these different countries or republics is to actually attract tourists not only from Russia but ultimately also from abroad. So you have this airport up here, Mineralny Vody, which is one of the closest airports aside from Sochi, and then you have Stavropol in the north. You have a couple of other airports, but Mineralny Vody is one of the main airports for this region that has been completely updated, really completely renovated. You go in there, you can see the old airport, and now there's a new one, and it's if you go in there, very modern. When I was there, you also can hear a lot of Eastern or European tourists speaking German, French, Spanish, Italian, and I believe from time to time it depends that they have actually had direct flights from Italy or other locations, and also Dubai, I believe. It kind of fluctuates. So this is again more PR for this this type of tourism. Very heavily involved with visits. For example, you see here Dmitry Medvedev visiting Arkhis. And Arkhis is the one in my research that has been completed. It was first opened in December of 2013. And in 2017, it had about, per year for that season, the 2017 winter season, had about 240,000 tourists visiting it. And so these are key indicators that they hope to have apparently accumulated by 2025. So 13,000 beds, 68 kilometers of ski trails, and including tax revenue, and these are all in rubles, of course. And so this is, of course, all of the resorts together. So the question is, what about sustainable development and tourism? So when you're traveling in this region, from scholars and other people with whom I've spoken to while there, you keep hearing this phrase, sustainable development. Sustainable development. There's even a regional journal that is promoted by local scholars that is called the Sustainable Development of Mountain Territories. So the question is, what does this mean? What does sustainable development mean? And this is just a brief background for those of you who might want to know a bit more. It comes originally, this idea of sustainability comes from the 1987 United Nations report on our common future, known as the Brundtland Report. And it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, that is one of the main facets, at least in this sort of Western UN global concept, right, of what sustainability is. And you also have the UN World Tourism Organization seeing tourism as an important economic activity. It's one of the main growing economic industries in the world. And it plays an essential role, according to the UNWTO, in reducing poverty, providing jobs, direct sales, and so forth. But it also is important to remember that because it is so involved at many different scales, right? Tourism at different scales, globally, locally, nationally, whatever, you can see that it's very important to look at the impacts on social, economic, and natural environments. So this is, according to the UN World Tourism Organization, these are 3 different ways in which sustainable tourism balances the social, environmental, and economic factors. So first of all, it should make optimal use of environmental resources that constitute a key element in tourism development. It should maintain essential ecological processes and help to conserve natural resources and biodiversity. Secondly, it respects the social cultural authenticity of host communities, conserve their built and living cultural heritage and traditional values, and contribute to the intercultural understanding and tolerance. This is a very interesting aspect also, and that's something I hope to get into a little bit more in my own research, is what this actually means, authenticity, when it comes to tourism. Because one can argue that tourism in many ways can be a performance, can be something that is never completely authentic. What does that really mean? And so, because people are still, performing something that is not maybe necessarily what they would be doing in their daily lives. So that's something that is a question. Also, it should ensure viable long-term economic operations and provide socio-economic benefits to all stakeholders. And again, this is another question about where are these benefits going, and that's one of the questions that I also have in these different locations of my research. I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are certain ways of measuring sustainability according to indicators. A number of institutions have indicators, or are in the process of developing indicators for measuring sustainable tourism. From all of these organizations, especially the UN and European institutions. So a lot of them are really engaged, within Europe, actually measuring tourism, sustainability, and ecotourism. But that is something that might be interesting for me if I'm looking at, certain sustainability issues, but not necessarily. It's not like I'm going to use all of these indicators. So some questions that I have right now in this stage of my research is, first of all, how do relevant local and non-local actors and institutions conceptualize sustainability and sustainable development? How are the ones that are engaged in tourism actually, see themselves as pursuing sustainability? Why are they sustainably developing these? What are they doing exactly? And how do these conceptualizations play out in the tourism activities at each location? And also, how are they similar or different from conceptualizations held by the local population? You know, what does the local population think about sustainability? What meanings do they have? And you know, what does this term mean for them? And then finally, you know, what do these meanings and how do they interact in either complement or conflict, you know, with regards to perhaps land use, you know, use of the nature reserve around which all of these tourist sites are located. That's one question that I still have. So the 3 tourism locations are here, and you can see, so this is a little bit difficult to see on the map, but this is, they're all along the fringes of this natural state biosphere reserve, which is the Tebedinsky State National Biosphere Reserve. So you can see it up here, and all 3 of them are kind of located along the fringes. So from all of them, you can access the Tebedinsky Biosphere Reserve. And I just wanted to show you again here on this map. So one is located here, another one slightly there, and another one slightly to the east. So you can see a little bit better here. This is the Biosphere Reserve, a little bit better outlined, and these are the 3 locations. So that is the main natural attraction. So what we're talking about here is nature-based tourism. So tourism that is, you know, happening in that location because nature is the primary draw. So, you know, people want to do the mountain climbing. They want to see, you know, animals, wild animals. They want to be out in nature. So these, again, in just, it's a little bit blurry, but anyway, in the 3 locations, these are explaining the types of settlements. So Akhiz, which is the one that the Russian state has set up. Dombai, which is a resort village, and that one is located right here. So Dombai is the resort village, and it is one that is a Soviet sort of Soviet tourism development, a tourism development that is, one can argue, has many issues regarding sustainability and cleanliness. A lot of people, actually when I was there, people were complaining that it is fairly dirty. So I'll show you some photos a little bit later. But this one is not part, so this is the only tourism location that is part of this push by the Russian federal government. So these are different scales. Here, this one you have local, you've had Soviet from the past involvement, but you also have local, you know, governmental involvement and control. And then Uchkulan is one out here that is really small. It's like off the grid. You go up there, and it's actually in a rural mountain settlement. So you go into the settlement, and then you have to take another truck or car up another 20 kilometers up the mountain, and there's no electricity. You're really off the grid, no cell phone service up there after a certain point. So you can see the you know, populations of all of these are very, very low. You know, it's only a few hundred people. So you know, given the low populations of the inhabitants, and mainly you can see that the ethnicities are Karachai, right? Those are the primary. You know, that's the primary ethnicity, and then secondly, you have Russian. So the question is, you know, how does this play out in who is involved with tourism, what households, how many households are involved, you know, and who is benefiting, and how does that contribute to the sustainability of, you know, the social aspects of the sustainability of each of these locations. And these are all the same, basically the same types of tourism as I mentioned before. And you have the management here, which I've just explained. You have the professional large-scale management of the Russian state in Akhiz. You have the professionalized large-scale, large-capacity management in Dombai. And then you have in Uchkulan, it's very small, personal. There's absolutely no state involvement. It's a couple of households, people who happen to own land, families who own land up there near the entryway to the state reserve. And they own, you know, that, and they have their own private campsites and sites where people are able to, you know, stay overnight. And the main natural attraction, again, is the Tebedinsky State Nature Biosphere Reserve. So these are some photos you have about Hees, this is the one that was just updated in 2013, right? You can see state of the cutting edge, state of the art sorts of settlements. And this was specifically engineered to be a sort of answer to European Switzerland, right? It's kind of the Russian answer to Europe's Switzerland. And that was actually stated as such by, I think it was Dmitry Medvedev when he signed the decree. There have been multiple statements that I've come across that really liken this project to like the, next St. Moritz or something. So, which is very interesting. And so you can see here, these are two maps that show where they're all located. These buildings, and then you have skiing, skiing hills and different, according to different levels. Here are a few more pictures. They love to post on social media and kind of keep people appraised of, the fun that everyone is having there. So you can see again a very cutting edge sort of design, and that's actually not surprising because you do have involvement from mainly Austrian and French companies here who are helping with regards to infrastructure such as ski lifts and alpine design. And so here you actually have, and this is interesting because it ties into environmental claims that these centers are making, these tourist locations are making. That here you have, very environmentally friendly sorts of uses of the land. For example, you have national ropeways to assemble very environmentally friendly lifts. So you have, here the Austrian and French companies involved with that. And you also have here the establishment of a nature center, Caucasus Nature Center, which they have certain programs to promote, say, the snow leopard, or to bring back certain endangered species, and they're very, very visible about this environmental aspect of the tourist attraction. Dombai, again, is the Soviet-era settlement that has been updated and is still one of the most popular locations. This is kind of looking down from one of the lifts this summer. This is my own photo. And you have here a couple of photos. So this is going up the mountain, and this is at the very top of the mountain. And then these are markets kind of alongside. So it's a lot of engagement by people who come to sell things in the markets. But you also have, for example, here people coming with their animals and bringing them around, and you can come and ride the animals for a certain fee, or selling their own, baked goods up there. So it's still an element of kind of organically, people coming up there. Nothing with high marketing, even though.
Was there a sushi bar on the previous picture?
Yeah. Yes. And actually, very interestingly, I read something how a lot of people go here Russians go here thinking that this is going to be, a cheaper option than going elsewhere out of the country, when in fact, actually, food here is very, very expensive. You would pay almost as much as you might pay at a cafe in a Swiss resort. So there are issues with the marketing here. It's popular, but it also has problems, and this is something that's also underlying my research interests as well, is this infrastructure, right? You have at the very first, in the very first instance of the Russian state's site in Arkiz, a very new infrastructure. Here you have a very old infrastructure, something that was built in the 80s and was never actually finished, so it was never used. This is something that was built in 1985 and just stands there in the middle of the settlement, really in prime. It was literally like right behind here, like off to the side. It's right in the middle of the settlement. And you have this giant structure that was never finished for various reasons, right? This is another photo of them this summer, and it's just standing there and decaying. And what are the repercussions for that on people living in the settlement, for tourists? And questions about sustainability, because this is obviously not something that people would see as environmentally friendly, a decrepit building that was, resources were used to build it. It was actually supposed to rotate. So yeah, it actually had a platform, a cement platform, and it was supposed to rotate. So it was supposed to rotate with the sun, and then there was a crack that formed in the foundation, and it just stopped. Like they were not able to correct that. So you have those issues in Dongbei with these old Soviet structures, and that's another component of sustainability that I'm interested in questioning while I'm there. What do local people see this as? What is it? Has it been repurposed in different ways? I read things about how it's been repurposed to, as parking lots, parking space, and things like that. So Uchkalan is the final location, and it is a very tiny little mountain village. And again, to get up to the site, the tourist site, you have to take a truck of another 20 kilometers. So here, these are just some photos from the summer. You see people growing cabbage and other vegetables. And those things, some of them are actually relevant to the past of the Karachai, because the entire population was deported under Stalin. They were all deported to Central Asia, and then after Stalin's death, they were allowed to return and then resettle. So you do have a history of deportation and resettlement back in the area, and that is another underlying component of the questions of the social aspects surrounding tourism in this area. Who is benefiting and who has control of the land, and so forth. And so another question here, again, as you see, this was this summer, we had to take a very long detour because this bridge had just washed out. And so they were working on the bridge. Let me actually back to, yes. Let me see if I can actually show you a photo. Okay. Oops. Here we go. All right, so this is here. You don't have to listen to it, but this is actually showing the problem with the bridge. And this gives you a little bit of a better idea of the location. And when I was there, actually, people were very skeptical. People that I was traveling with were very skeptical about the fact that it would actually be repaired, in a timely fashion. Luckily, it has been repaired. But this creates a huge problem for access for tourists, of course, because in order to reach the campsite, you have to no longer go over the bridge, you have to go around and through the entire mountain village, which was really a huge detour. So this is another problem that you have in these tiny locations. All right. So yes, infrastructure is still a problem there. These are just another few photos to show you the campsites, right? So this is, for example, one site that a family runs. It's owned by a family, and the two women mainly run it, two sisters. So they have a space back there where they cook, and people who are staying in these little huts, and they basically camp out there. And again, it's off the grid. And they do have a little tiny store. So it's a very small store where they sell a couple of products because there is no other store up there. So you eat what you bring with you, or you have to go all the way back down to the village, which is a 20-kilometer ride. Yeah. And this is her sister, the one who was doing some cooking for us. So, yeah. So to end, I wanted to end with a tiny discussion of the Tibetan-Ski State Nature Biosphere Reserve, because it is the main natural attraction. However, it is heavily guarded in certain areas. So it depends. At all of these three tourist sites, you can actually reach the Biosphere Reserve, but there are different degrees of access. So from Dongbei, it's fairly easy to access. There's just a pretty low level of security. But for example, here in Uchkalan, this was heavily guarded. You had to have a passport control, and you had to have your name on a list of people that had been pre-approved, which can be difficult. So I was not allowed inside because my name was not on this list. And it's actually difficult sometimes to gain access because laws can change very quickly. So you have, maybe 2 weeks you need to give a notice to receive, authorization. But other times it can switch to a month. And so when I was there, they needed like a month in advance to know that I would be would be with this group of people accessing this reserve. So I ended up sitting with 2 border guards from Dagestan who were very happy to talk to me about the ethnic differences and linguistic differences in their republic, and chop up some watermelon. But they did not let me go through. I mean, they were not bribable, which is a good sign. I mean, so they were not,
Not that you tried.
No, exactly. No, I mean, they were very official. They were very official. I mean, there was definitely no sort of nothing at all. You could tell there was no getting past them. And actually, after they got my information, they still wanted my information. As someone who was in the area, they came back a day later to get more information about what I was doing surrounding that area. And who knows if they also said, well, they may return at some point again. They were very friendly and courteous, but there's a level of control. Yeah, and they also were not, in the second instance, they came to the campsite, and one of the scholars I was there with, invited him for a vodka, and he said, no, I'm on duty, I cannot drink while I'm working as a state official for the government of the Russian Federation, and that was it. So, yes, and this was a younger man. So, so it was very...
I'll be back at 5.
Exactly, it was very formal. So, this was a photo taken up by me, but of a colleague who was there, actually made it through, whose name was on the list. And actually, though, there was another group, so we split into a few groups. There was another group who actually made it through without any list, because they went by foot instead of by car. So, while access is heavily controlled at certain areas, it's really lax at other areas. So you have different regimes of control around the reserve. So that's another aspect, and that is also a question for tourism, what does this mean, and also for the utilization of the nature resources in the reserve, because you do have tourists coming and picking berries, picking mushrooms, and it makes you question the sustainability of that if there are too many people accessing that, and that's why it's another question with regards to who can access and when and why. And these are a few final pictures. And thank you very much. This was a kitty in Bombay who was very sweet. Yes, we wanted to steal
Surprised you
him.
didn't take it home.
We wanted to actually, but he was actually the pet of. So the location where we were staying was like a Russian mountaineers. I don't know how you would say it in English. Russian mountaineers security, like if people get stuck up on a mountain. Mountain rescue, exactly. It was basically the mountain rescue of the Russian Federation. They had a site there, and that's where we stayed. It was this group of like students and professors from Ecological, and when we discovered the cat, the guys, the rescuers, this group of guys were like, no, you're not taking the cat with you. That's ours. And they did sit at night cuddling with the cat, so yes.